Um, Hope you're enjoying the cool weather. It's nice to see the fall and the fall colors, all the changes. Nice to be out of the heat a little bit. We actually, yeah. We actually got away to Tahoe with some friends from the church here, and that was cold. I think it got down to like 13 at one point. It was a little chilly, but it was nice. It was a nice little change. We are going to be in the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus today. So if you want to turn that direction, that's where we're going to be. We have been in this series that I called Outlining the Story, where we're looking at just kind of the broad brushstroke of the Old Testament. We're going to miss a lot of things, probably some of your favorite stories or things that you enjoy about the Old Testament. I'm probably going to skip completely over those things because we're trying to just get a general sense of God's working through the Old Testament and really I would say some of the central theses of the Old Testament. What is God trying to communicate to us in these narratives and what he was doing in history? And so we've seen already that God was the creator of everything, right? Which means he has rights to everything in all creation. He gave everything in his creation purpose, right? And our purpose was to reflect him, to image him. And we took that responsibility and that freedom we had of choice, and we turned that around and used it for ourselves instead of our Creator, and that kind of broke everything. The world is still broken because of that. And as generation went on and on and on, things got worse and worse and worse and worse, and God ends up wiping out everyone on the planet except for this one family. We think maybe things are going to be repaired now because all the bad people have been wiped off the planet, right? And then we instantly see the depravity of man continue in the line of Noah. Then we continue to see just things unraveling for humanity, right? We can't quite get things right. And we get to this guy Abraham, right, which we got to a couple of weeks ago, where God begins to lay out his plan for mankind that begins with one man and then continues through his family. And today we're going to be looking at his family, the generations after him. I really appreciated that last song. It's just a great song in general, but it's really what we're talking about this morning, that God is faithful, yesterday, now, always, right? And we're going to see that as God continues to be faithful to the generations after Abraham. So let me pray for us and we'll get into it. Lord, just so thankful to spend time in these texts this week. Thankful that we have a chance to look at these this morning. As they just remind me of who you are, of a central characteristic of who you are is just your faithfulness. That even when we are unfaithful as humans, when we are unfaithful as individuals, that you just continue to be faithful to us. That you continue to be committed to the promises that you've made to us. And as we look at kind of how that works out in the relationship you have with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then also with as we begin to see that with the Israelites and Moses, may we just see you for who you are, that you are a faithful God who is committed to your promises and will come through every time. And help me just to kind of get out of the way and for you that truth to be seen very clearly. I pray this all in your name. Amen. We're going to start at the end of, actually in the middle of Genesis. We saw this last week, this verse out of Genesis chapter 15, that as Abraham trusted God, which he did, he had to do that a lot. We saw that in his life. He trusted Yahweh in so many different situations, right? So many different circumstances. It seems like as his life went on, the opportunities to trust God became greater and greater, more difficult and more difficult, and he trusted God, even when God said ridiculous things, like you're going to have a kid and you're 100 years old, right? He trusted God. And what God did in response to that is he said, you know what, you're not a righteous person, Abraham. We saw very clearly he's not a righteous guy, right? But he said, I'm going to credit righteousness to you. This becomes the standard by which God's going to work through the generations after Moses. That this covenant contract required faith on the part of the people, and God's response is crediting righteousness, right? And that is still the same thing today. That has carried on through for the last 4,000 years. That as we trust God, He will credit us righteousness. Are we righteous in and of ourselves? No, all right? Our lives demonstrate it daily, right? Just how unrighteous we are, the propensities we have to unrighteousness, right? But He chooses to credit us righteousness as we trust in Him, right? And that continued, again, through the generations. We see in Genesis 15, this is right in that section where they're acting out this covenant ritual that we talked about last time. And I didn't actually cover these verses, but if you remember, they were splitting animals, and Yahweh floats through the animals, and so it's kind of a bloody mess, and it's a really weird way to sign a contract, but that's what they're doing. And right in the middle of that section, we have this paragraph here. And this is what it says. Then God said to Abram, know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace, and you will be buried at a good old age. Then in the 4th generation they will return here, for the wrongdoing of the Amorite is not yet complete. So while Abraham's going to live out a pretty good life, right? He's going to live to a good old age. His descendants would actually have a much, much more difficult time. And God is preparing the people for this. He's being very clear with Abraham about this happening, that the journey to kind of the fulfillment of this contract, of this covenant, it was not going to be an easy one. He might have assumed it was going to be an easy one because, when God's involved, I think we think this sometimes, when God's involved, obviously things have to go easily, right? And go well. And when things don't go well, we're like, wait, why is God not involved here? No, God's involved, right? And God's definitely involved here. But He's like, you know what? This journey is not going to be a straight line. It's not going to be just an easy path. It's not going to, this fulfillment of the covenant is not going to come in Isaac's lifetime. And Abraham might have even assumed that. Like, it's going to happen now. Or maybe Isaac's kids, right? Maybe Jacob. It's going to happen in Jacob's lifetime. It doesn't happen in Jacob's lifetime either. He says, know this for sure, your descendants will live in a land not their own. Which was really the story of Abraham's life. He lived in a land that was not his own for his whole life. And he's like, not only are you going to do that, but also your descendants, and your descendants' descendants, and your descendants' descendants, right? Like your son's sons and your son's son's sons are all going to live in a land not their own. And worse than that, and by the way, this happens, right? You have the life of Isaac, Abraham's son. He lives in a land that's not his own. Jacob lives in a land that's not his own. And things are actually going to get exceedingly difficult toward the end of your generations, which is they will be enslaved. And this is exactly what we see. Isaac's son Jacob becomes Israel. His name gets changed to Israel. That's where we get the namesake for Israel. And Israel has some boys. Okay, he has 12 boys, and one of those boys ends up becoming the second most important person in the land of Egypt. Jacob's family moves to Egypt, and things actually go pretty well for them. Because of Joseph's place in the nation, they actually get the best plot of land in Egypt. Things are looking up. Things are looking good. Things are awesome. And they're having kids and having lots of kids. They're growing as a group. But then look at this. There you go. Strangers in the land. This is Exodus 1. And Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. But the sons of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly, and multiplied, and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. What do we have here? We have God keeping his promise, right? Remember this? This is Genesis 15, 5 and 6. And he took him outside. Yahweh took Abram outside. Now look toward the heavens and count the stars, if you're able to count them. Was he able to count them? No, innumerable, right? And he said to them, so shall your descendants be. Then he believed in Yahweh, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Abraham, who's 100, doesn't even have a single descendant, is promised to have innumerable descendants. And within 4 generations, that number is exploding. God is faithful. He's doing what he said he would do. And Abraham trusted that God would do this. Did God come through? He did. He did. But then we have this, verse 8. Now a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Do you hear that? The descendants of the childless one, Abraham, and the childless one, Sarah, became too many and too mighty for one of the greatest civilizations on the planet. Is God faithful? Definitely faithful. Doing what he said he would do. Holding up his end of the contract, right? Look at verse 10. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. Otherwise, they will multiply. And in the event of a war, they will also join those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. They were nervous. They were worried about these guys. They were like, they're too many and too mighty, and if they decide to create an alliance with someone else, we're toast. One of the greatest civilizations on the planet is worried about this. God's coming through. So they appointed taskmasters over them to oppress them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they opposed them, the more they multiplied and the more they spread out, so that they dreaded the sons of Israel. The Egyptians used violence to compel the sons of Israel to labor, and they made their lives bitter and with hard labor in the mortar and bricks, and at all kinds of labor in the field. All of their labors which they violently had them perform as slaves. Do you hear the faithfulness in this? Right? They try to oppress the people. They make them slaves in the land, which, by the way, Yahweh had already prepared them for that, right? He told Abraham they would become slaves in the land. They would be enslaved and oppressed. This was part of the plan, right? But they tried to hurt them. They tried to minimize them. They tried to make them weak and a beaten people. And they had grown so great and strong in Egypt that this was caused, that this enslavement was caused. And they remained slaves for 430 years. But the more they oppressed them, the more they were almost wiped out. Is that what it says? The more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied. Do you see how this story is not about the people of Israel? This story is about their God. This is not the likely result. The likely result is if you are oppressed and beaten and killed and you have hard labor, you're not going to have a very long life. That's the way it's going to go, is you're probably going to shrink as a people and be beaten as a people. But the more they oppress them, the more the faithful one, Yahweh, multiplied them. He's doing his part. He's holding up his end of the contract. They even at one point tried to have a moment of mass genocide where they're just going to kill a whole bunch of babies. And that doesn't even happen. In fact, they flourish even more. God is faithful. He said in Genesis 17, I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Is he multiplying them? Yeah, he is. Genesis 17:6, I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. Is he doing this? Yes, he's doing this. Genesis 22, Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars in the heavens and as the sand, which is on the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. Is God faithful? He's faithful. And that's what this narrative is trying to show us, God's faithfulness. Point on your handout if you want to put it in there. As Yahweh continues to demonstrate his faithfulness to the covenant contract for the next 400 years, while he works out his plan to bring about its ultimate fulfillment. Yahweh continues to demonstrate his faithfulness to the covenant contract for the next 400 years while he works out his plan to bring about its ultimate fulfillment. Do you guys have a "by" in there? Shoot. You could just X that out in there. Typo. So God's passively working to multiply them, to strengthen them. And now he moves to a more active role in what's happening here. I'm going to go to Exodus 2. It says this, the sons of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage ascended to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. Notice that as you read through this narrative, and clearly in these verses, the covenant is the thing that's in focus, always in focus. That is the thing that has always come back to, that Yahweh is ready to fulfill his covenant promises to the people. And now it's time to kind of start putting that plan into place. So you have this Israelite boy who was born. His name's Moses. He ends up eventually in this area called Midian, and he has this encounter with Yahweh. This is in chapter 3. It says, Now Moses was pasturing the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I will turn aside and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burning up. When Yahweh saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And Yahweh said, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their outcry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good and spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. And now, behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. And now come, I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, Assuredly I will be with you, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship at this mountain. Do you notice Moses' response to this whole situation? So, he's brought close to God. God is speaking to him. God is telling him what the plan is. And if you notice the language, God is saying all of the things that he is going to do. He's like, I am going to do this, and I'm going to use you to go do this thing. And Moses' response is, Who am I? I can't free my people. I don't have what it takes to go do this. And God's like, you don't understand. You don't get it. That's not what I was saying. You misunderstood everything that I just told you. You are not freeing the people. Who's freeing the people? I am freeing the people. You get to just be a part of it. You get to come be my instrument. God is continuing to demonstrate this relational aspect of him with his people. That it's this partnership. Although I don't like the word partnership. I was just talking to someone this week about that. Because it sounds like partnership like we're equals. Are we equals? We're not equals, right? But God's allowing us to participate in what he is doing, right? But he is clearly the one that is doing this. Moses has no ability to make any sort of changes to the status of his people. He is not going to free his people, and he has no power to do so. But does Yahweh have the power to do so? Of course he does. And he's going to include Moses in that process. He goes on in 13. He says, "Then Moses said to God, 'Behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me. Now they may say to me, what is his name? What shall I say to them?' And God said to Moses, 'I am who I am.' And he said, 'This is what you are to say to the sons of Israel. I am has sent me to you.'" Yahweh has sent me to you. God furthermore said to Moses, "This is what you shall say to the sons of Israel. Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is the name for all generations to use to call upon me." You guys have heard me talk about this before. Anytime the letters in capital letters or small caps, the Lord, it's actually God's personal name. It is not the Lord. It is Yahweh. And what's interesting to me is the reason why we still do this, I don't know what translations still translate it as the Lord, but because it's based on this superstition that the Jewish people had that you couldn't say God's name. It was too holy to say God's name. But what I find interesting about that, because this is just like a pet peeve thing of mine, but it clearly says, "This is the name forever. This is my name forever. This is the name for all generations to use to call upon me." Like, why aren't the Jewish people using it to call upon him? They thought it was too holy. I don't know. I prefer just to call upon him by his personal name, Yahweh, right? I find that to be very important. So this is where he reveals this, right? He goes on in 16. Thanks for letting me go off on that for a second. "Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I am indeed concerned about you and what has been done to you in Egypt. So I said, I will bring you up out of the oppression of Egypt to the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, to the land flowing with milk and honey. Then I will pay attention to what you say. And you, with the elders of Israel, will come to the king of Egypt, and you will say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. So now, please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, so that we may sacrifice to Yahweh our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not permit you to go, except under compulsion. So I will reach out with my hand and strike Egypt and all my miracles which I shall do in the midst of it, and after that he will let you go. I will grant this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And it shall be that when you go, you will not go empty-handed. But every woman shall ask her neighbor, and the woman who lives in her house, for articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing, and you will put them on your sons and daughters, and you will plunder, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. This is exactly how it goes down. Most of us are familiar with this story. This is exactly the way the story goes. Moses makes this request to Pharaoh. Pharaoh refuses to let them go. In fact, he makes things worse for the Israelites. Then the Israelites actually end up getting mad at Moses because things go badly and it goes worse for them. And Moses, questions God and is like, "What are you doing? Why aren't you doing your part?" But then Yahweh quickly comes in. He strikes Egypt with these 10 plagues. That ends with this final plague in which Yahweh kills all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, which is all demonstrating what God said he would do back in Genesis 15 when he would judge that nation. He will judge the nation in whom they will serve. God judged Egypt and brought the covenant people of Israel out of Egypt. Then he goes on. Exodus 6. So flip another page there. You probably need it. I am Yahweh, and I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, Yahweh, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as strangers. He keeps coming back to reminding them that I had a relationship with Abraham. I had a relationship with Isaac. I had a relationship with Jacob. I had a relationship with all of the generations prior to your generation. And I have a relationship with you. And that relationship is a contractual relationship, a covenant relationship. Reminding them over and over again that he will continue to be faithful. Verse 5, he says, furthermore, hopefully you can see that, it's a little small. Furthermore, I have heard the groaning of the sons of Israel, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Say therefore, the sons of Israel, I am Yahweh, I will bring you out of the labors of the Egyptians, and I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Then I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out from under the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I will give it to you as a possession. I am Yahweh. Now, I know I covered a lot of text here, right? I don't usually put this much text up. But what I'm trying to hopefully communicate is that the narrative is all about one thing being centrally located in this story, which is a covenant, a contract between Yahweh and his people, and it's about Yahweh coming through on that contract. It's about Yahweh doing what he said he would do, saying, I will do this, I will hold this up, I promise you, this is the way things will go, and he just comes through over and over and over and over again. He's the covenant keeper. He was the covenant keeper for Abraham. He was the covenant keeper for Isaac. He was the covenant keeper for Jacob. And I'll be that for you too, Israelites. In fact, so many times throughout the rest of the Old Testament, as the generations went on and on and on and on, they were reminded over and over and over and over again of what Yahweh did here. Well, why did they do that? Why do you find the story of the Exodus being repeated so many times in the Old Testament? It's because they needed to remember that God is a covenant-keeping God. That is who he is. And as he was a covenant keeper in the generations before, he would be a covenant keeper in their generation and the generations to come. Not only that, but he will also be their God, and they will be his people. Do you hear the relational nature of that? My people. This is who our God is. Point in the handout, if you want to fill it in, is Yahweh develops a relationship with Moses that required trusting him to come through on impossible promises. Yahweh comes through again. Yahweh develops a relationship with Moses that required trusting him to come through on impossible promises. Yahweh comes through again. Yahweh had a pretty simple relationship with his people. I think that continues to be the case, but we'll leave it in this historical time. He just said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. He told Moses, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And it required one simple thing of his people. Trust. Right? Just going, I trust you. And behavior that followed that, right? Did Moses go to Pharaoh? Yeah, he did, right? But not because for any other reason other than the fact that he trusted Yahweh. He's like, yeah, I trust you're going to do what you said you would do. And then did God come through? Sure did. I don't know about you, but I read these stories and these narratives, and I see the faithfulness of my God, and sometimes I go, what an idiot am I? Right? That my only job is to trust. My only job, he's made so many promises, so many guarantees in my life, and all I have to do is go, okay, I trust you. And at times I fail to trust him, right? Brings up a new thing, and I go, a new thing, uh-oh, right? Maybe he's not going to be faithful in this thing, and I'm idiot, right? Come on. Exodus 12, a little bit farther into the story here. You have Israel getting ready to leave Egypt. Yahweh establishes a new calendar that's actually based on their exodus, okay? Again, because I think he wants to remind them of his faithfulness, right? This moment of great faithfulness in their people. And so he creates this new calendar based on that. And he explains to every person in Israel that this in order to keep this covenant with him, that they needed to take a lamb, and they needed to kill it and eat it in a certain way, and they need to eat it with a certain type of bread, and they need to take blood and use it in a particular way, and then the community needs to gather in a particular way. So he's kind of extending some stipulations of the covenant, right? This is that illustration I gave of Netflix every so often sends you that we're updating the terms of service or whatever, right? He's updating the terms of service here. And this is what it says in chapter 12. He says, "Now this day shall be a memorial for you. You shall celebrate it as a feast to Yahweh. Throughout your generations you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the first day you shall remove dough with yeast from your houses. For whoever eats anything with yeast from that day until the seventh day, the person shall be cut off from Israel." Once again, God's giving some of these new stipulations, right? This new agreement, or additions to the agreement. And he says it's not just for now, it's not just for your generation, but it's for the generations that come after you. Generation after generation after generation. This will be a permanent part of our agreement, of our contract. And notice what he says. I want to keep this in view for us because it really makes a difference going forward. We'll start seeing this next week. He says, here's the updated terms of service. And what does he say if they don't accept the updated terms of service? You're out. You're cut off, right? Because it's a contract, right? Just like any contract you have ever entered into in your life, or I've entered into in my life, there's two parties and they have an agreement, right? And both parties have to hold up their end of the bargain. And he's saying, if you're not willing to hold up your end of the contract, you actually should be excluded from Israel, because the only people that are part of Israel are those who are committed to this contract. So are you going to be committed? Are you willing to be committed? Verse 17, he says, "You shall also keep the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your multitudes out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall keep this day throughout your generations as a permanent ordinance." So he's saying, right, I'm going to do what I promised to do. You're going to do what you promised to do. I'm going to take you out of Egypt, and you're going to celebrate this festival to be reminded of it all the time. And so this is going to be ongoing, right? An ongoing situation. Now you scoot down to verse 35, and it says, "Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. And Yahweh had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they let them have their request. Therefore they plundered the Egyptians." So not only is this group of people leaving, they are leaving with a ton of loot, right? As they agree to this contract with Yahweh, and they do their part by trusting in Yahweh in the contract, Yahweh fulfills his end of the bargain. Remember back in Genesis 15, he said, they shall come out with many possessions, right? So this is the situation in which it's happening, is that let me go back here. Yahweh is, after 430 years of slavery, they leave exponentially more wealthy because they simply do this. It's kind of a funny picture. They go to their neighbors and they're like, they're walking around their neighbor's house and they're like, "I'll take that, and I'll take that, and I'll take that. Yeah. And then they go to the next neighbor's house and they're like, "Oh, that's pretty. I'll take that, and I'll take that." And did you notice the language? Yahweh had given the people favor in their sight. Yahweh had made them so disposed to this idea that they were like, sure, take anything you want. It's yours, right? It's crazy, right? And they're walking away with all this stuff. Who's in view here? The Israelites? Who's the key character here? The Israelites? No, this is all Yahweh's doing, right? He's making it happen. And so after 430 years of slavery, they are leaving more wealthy as a people, larger as a people group, stronger as a people group. You show me anywhere in history where a people has been enslaved and oppressed in this way, and they leave stronger. That doesn't happen. That's usually how people groups get wiped out. But not this people group. Why? Because Yahweh's involved. The promise keeper, the contract keeper is involved. It's not about, we shouldn't look through this and go, man, those Israelites were a strong, hardy group of people. No, it wasn't about them. We should look at our God and like, oh man, our God is strong. Our God is faithful. So the Israelites pick up their stuff, they head out, they come to the Red Sea, Pharaoh's army ends up following them. Yahweh splits the Red Sea, the Israelites walk through, and Pharaoh's armies try to come through, and they get drowned, right? Then this happens in Exodus, or these are the words here in Exodus 14. It says, so Yahweh saved Israel that day from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which Yahweh had used against the Egyptians, the people feared Yahweh. They respected him deeply. And they believed in Yahweh. They faithed in Yahweh. They placed their trust in Yahweh and in his servant Moses. Israel sees Yahweh showing up the way he showed up in so many different amazing ways, right? Him keeping his end of the bargain, him keeping his promises in miraculous and powerful ways. I mean, they're witnessing all these dead bodies laying on the seashore, and they're like, wow, right? And they trusted him. They found him faithful. They found him to be one who could be relied upon. And again, I read this and I think, how faithful has God been in my life? Is that emboldening me in my faith? Am I continuing to find him trustworthy? Because he has been trustworthy. I mean, I could stand up here and just name it over and over and over again. We could be here hours. I could talk to you about how faithful Yahweh has been. Do I live as if I trust him fully? Even though he's shown himself to be trustworthy every time? It challenges me. It makes me think about my response. The point on your handout is this. Yahweh established new required provisions for his covenant with Israel, and they find God to be trustworthy. Yahweh established new required provisions for his covenant with Israel, and they find God to be trustworthy. The truth is this. The truth that these narratives are trying to beat into our heads and beat into my head too is that God is 100% faithful. And that same God that brought Israel out of Egypt, because he promised to bring Israel out of Egypt, that same God who enriched Israel as they came out of Egypt, the same God who showed up in Moses' life, that Moses didn't have to do the heavy lifting of getting his people out of Israel, that he did the heavy lifting, and he was faithful to do that, is the same God who's doing the heavy lifting in our lives. Right? He's the same God 30 years ago in my life. I'm not that young, but 30 years ago, I would have been, 14 or something, right? He's that same God 4,000 years ago, right? The same God who showed up for me every time in the past is the same God who's ready to show up for me today, right? Am I willing to trust him? I love this quote at the bottom of your handout. It's by a guy named Jerry Bridges. He's an evangelical author. And it says this. It says, the promises of the Bible are nothing more than God's covenant to be faithful to his people. It is his character that makes these promises valid. I've had a number of conversations. I've actually had people in my life for many, many years that evaluate God's faithfulness on their own faithfulness. You know what I'm saying? They say, I've so messed up this area of my life, no way God's going to come through in that area of my life. That is not how we should evaluate God's faithfulness, right? When we are unfaithful, he is faithful. So no matter how much we've messed things up, no matter how much we've stumbled and fallen down, and we'll see plenty of that in the life of Israel next week, God is a God who remains faithful. He cannot deny himself, right? It is central to who he is. He's going to come through. There's no question he's going to come through. The only question for us is, are we going to trust him to come through? I'm going to pray for us. Lord, it's so amazing just to see you show up, right? Over and over and over and over again. And we can see that historically. We can see that in the life of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants. But I know most of us can look back at our lives and see how he's shown up over and over and over and over again. You just continue to show up. But somehow I know the unfaithfulness of my heart. At times I choose not to trust you, even though you are the one worthy of all trust. Lord, help give us a faith. Help give us a trust in you. Help us to see you for who you are and step out in that next thing. Step out into this next area of life that might seem a little shaky or uncertain, an area of our lives that, man, if you don't come through, things are not going to go well. Lord, help us to take that step. Help us to continue to trust you because you are worthy of that trust.